You are listening to the FAFSA Leadership Lounge, the place where we break down the latest policies shaping education in Florida. I am Michelle White, Executive Director of the Florida Association of School Administrators.
And I'm Jessica Janasiewicz, the lobbyist for FAFSA in several school districts across Florida. Today, we've got a full lineup of topics to cover, from what's happening here in Tallahassee to the latest developments throughout the state.
So let's start our discussion this week talking about property taxes, specifically what the Florida House Select Committee on Property Taxes dug into during their meeting last week in Tallahassee.
It was a packed agenda. Lawmakers, local leaders, and policy groups all weighed in on what has become one of the hottest issues in state politics.
The committee was created earlier this year, 37 members handpicked by leadership, and their job is to explore ways to cut or even eliminate property taxes.
But local governments did show up ready to defend themselves. Casey Cook from the Florida League of Cities told lawmakers that waste is in the eye of the beholder. He pushed back against the idea that city budgets are bloated with fluff.
Yeah, and he argued that things some people might dismiss as extras, like parks, libraries, community programs, actually play a big role in safety and quality of life.
On the other hand, some committee members floated some really bold changes. For example, raising the homestead exemption to up to $500,000 for non-school taxes.
And even eliminating the requirement that voters approve changes to that exemption. Representative Tommy Gregory, who chairs the committee, said they've got to think big. He put it this way: the status quo isn't working for Florida homeowners. We can't ignore the pressure they're under.
Another idea was preventing local governments from foreclosing on homesteaded homes if people fall behind on their property taxes.
But of course, that drew some concern. One county commissioner told lawmakers, if you take away the enforcement mechanism, you could cripple our ability to collect revenue.
And then there was talk about consolidating services, even folding smaller cities back into counties to save money.
By the end, there wasn't a clear proposal on the table yet, but the committee made it clear. They're looking at sweeping changes, not just tinkering around the edges. So, how did we get here? How about a little history?
Well, Florida's homeowners already get some unique protections. There's the homestead exemption, which knocks a chunk off your taxable value, and the Save Our Homes cap, which limits how much your assessed value can rise each year, no more than 3%.
And those measures have shielded longtime owners. But newer buyers often get hit with much higher bills because their assessments reset to full market value. And with property values skyrocketing in the past decade, that's been painful.
Meanwhile, local governments depend heavily on property taxes. Statewide, they bring in about $50 billion a year. So every time lawmakers talk about cutting them, cities and counties warn that essential services could take a hit.
Governor Ron DeSantis and House leadership have made property tax relief a political priority, even creating the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, to comb through local budgets.
And those audits claimed nearly $400 million in wasteful spending across municipalities. But local leaders argue those numbers don't tell the full story.
So what happens now?
The committee will keep meeting with the goal of sending a proposal to the full House ahead of the 2026 session. Any major change will likely require a constitutional amendment, and that means 60% of voter approval.
The stakes couldn't be higher. Homeowners want relief, local governments fear losing their main revenue source, and state leaders want to prove they can deliver bold reform.
We'll be following this closely as the debate heats up.
Next, let's dive into this past week's State Board of Education meeting. Big moves on charter schools, heated debate over First Amendment issues in Alachua County, and what all this might mean for school leaders across the state.
So let's jump in. One of the major actions this week was the board approved an expansion allowing privately run Schools of Hope charter operators to co-locate inside existing public school buildings.
Right. Under the new rules, school districts must provide charter operators access to facilities, maintenance, safety, and transportation, effectively making public facilities available to these new charters.
Supporters say that this is a win for school choice. The board emphasized that these operators want to give the best education to those schools that haven't been getting the greatest education.
Critics, though, worry this could siphon off resources from public schools. If you place a charter inside a public school, how do you balance budgets, space, staffing, and facility wear and tear?
Right. It raises real operational headaches for districts, especially ones that are already stretched thin. But that wasn't the only flashpoint at the meeting.
Right. The state board also confronted the controversy surrounding Alachua County's school board and allegations of First Amendment violations from public comment session.
To recap, at issue was a July meeting in which a public commentator, Jeremy Klepper, was asked to leave after continuing to speak. The state board took up whether the Alachua County School Board had silenced his free speech.
The state board ultimately found probable cause that Alachua officials violated First Amendment rights and ordered First Amendment training and monitoring for 2025-26 year.
The state board is signaling that it will hold local boards accountable for public comment protocols.
So what should school administrators do? Take away from this?
Be aware. Local board policies on public comment, decorum, and removal are all under sharper scrutiny now. What used to be local board governance is now very much a matter of state interest.
And second, the charter co-location move means districts should review facility usage plans, lease agreements, reciprocal service costs, and how charter operators would interact with existing infrastructure.
And third, we'll likely see continued tension between local control and state policy priorities. As these board actions ripple outwards, local school leaders will need to navigate political, legal, and operational pressure points.
Well, let's highlight some good news in Florida's K-12 education system. There's quite a bit happening worth celebrating.
Let's start with school grades. This year, 71% of Florida schools earned an A or a B. That's up from 64% the year before.
And what's just as encouraging, the number of D and F schools dropped from 117 down to 71. Plus, no district in the state received a D or an F.
Governor DeSantis called it a reflection of the hard work of Florida's teachers and school leaders who are setting high expectations for students across the state.
There's also some exciting news at the early learning level. In Palm Beach County, kindergarten readiness climbed from 66% to more than 72%.
That's huge because readiness in kindergarten is a strong predictor of whether or not a child will read on grade level by third grade. Local officials said it best. When we start strong, we finish strong.
So bottom line, between higher school grades, better student progress, gains in kindergarten readiness, there are real bright spots to celebrate.
Exactly. It's not to say that challenges don't exist, they do, but it's also important to recognize when the work of educators and leaders is moving the needle in the right direction.
Couldn't agree more, and we'll keep tracking these wins because good news deserves airtime too. So as we move forward, committee weeks and the legislative session are coming soon. Bills are starting to be filed. There are currently 8 education-related bills, with many more to come. Most of these bills address pretty standard topics, such as individual education plans, educator certification and training, and term limits for school board members. However, there has been a bill filed, House Bill 49, titled Political Activities on School Grounds. The bill, quote, provides that certain activities are allowed on school grounds, authorizes candidates to be invited to speak on school grounds if certain conditions are met, prohibits certain political activities on school grounds, prohibits certain employees from using email, offices, or time during work hours for political advocacy, provides criminal penalties for persons who violate specified provisions, and provides that each such violation is a separate offense.
And interesting as we look to see that bill was filed looking at political activities, our Attorney General, James Uthmeyer, issued a warning last week to schools that try to prevent the group Turning Point USA from forming chapters in Florida. The AG announced that legal action would be brought when necessary to ensure that we're protecting the rights of students to organize, associate, and debate. Uthmeyer has not provided any details about which public schools have blocked chapters from being formed. Turning Point USA is the organization that was founded by Charlie Kirk. This organization has over 900 official college chapters and 1,200 high school chapters. Turning Point USA officials have reported a surge in interest since Charlie Kirk's death.
And a quick reminder before we go, Interim committee weeks are going to begin next week, October 6th. That's the warm up for the 2026 session starting in January, and you can count on us to share what's coming out of those meetings.
And that does it for this week. Thanks again for listening, and please share this with a colleague who wants to stay in the know. For a complete rundown of the bills we're following, head over to FAFSA.net and click on Advocacy. More updates are coming your way, so stay tuned.
Thank you for listening to the Leadership Lounge podcast presented by the Florida Association of School Administrators. Today's podcast was hosted by Michelle White and Jessica Janasiewicz. The podcast was produced by Jeff Willoughby. Original musical recordings by David Higgins. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. New episodes are released each Monday. For show topics, suggestions, questions, or comments, please email communications@fasa.net. We hope you enjoyed the show.